Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the brilliant mind of Al-Farabi. He was a 10th century polymath who didn't just study the world, but actually mapped out the entire universe of human thought. Seriously, if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by how disconnected modern information feels, you're going to find his approach incredibly fascinating.
Just think about it for a second. How do you even begin to map the entirety of human knowledge? Well, that massive question is exactly what drove our subject today. He wanted to create a brilliantly unified framework for absolutely everything. And I mean everything, from the words we speak to the music we play, all the way up to the literal mechanics of the cosmos.
Here's how we're going to break it down today. We'll meet the second master, look at how he mapped all human knowledge, dive into the great book of music, explore the physics of sound, and wrap up with his holistic legacy.
Okay, Part 1. Meet the second master, an intellectual giant of the Islamic Golden Age. So who was he? Born around 870 CE in Transoxiana, which is in modern-day Central Asia, Al-Farabi led a truly peripatetic, wandering life. He traveled all the way to the great intellectual hub of Baghdad. There, he studied under some of the most prominent logicians of the era and completely mastered multiple languages: Arabic, Greek, Syriac, Persian, you name it. This linguistic genius allowed him to read ancient texts in their original forms. His journey eventually took him to Aleppo and finally Damascus, where he passed away in 950 CE. His mastery of these subjects was so absolute, so profound, that he earned this legendary title, Mu'allim Fani, or the second teacher. Who was the first? Aristotle. That's right, he was considered second only to Aristotle himself. He earned this by painstakingly reconstructing the entire science of logic. But look, he wasn't just a translator. He was a brilliant innovator in his own right, perfectly adapting ancient Greek philosophy into the vibrant, booming context of the Islamic Golden Age.
Let's move on to Part 2, mapping all human knowledge through his famous work, The Enumeration of the Sciences.
In this truly groundbreaking text, he structured all human disciplines into a very specific hierarchy that built right from the ground up. Think of it like a pyramid. We start at the very base with human communication, move up into reasoning, climb higher through the mathematical and physical sciences, and finally hit the absolute cosmic peak of metaphysics. He was literally trying to grasp the entire scope of human knowledge in one go.
And what's really fascinating here is where he decides to start. You might expect a hardcore philosopher to kick things off with logic, right? But no, Al-Farabi places language first. In works like his Book of Letters, he makes this super compelling case that language is the ultimate framework for thought. The very words and categories we use literally shape our capacity to reason. So for him, language and logic aren't separate. They are deeply, intimately intertwined.
All right, Part 3, the great book of music, or Kitab al-Musika al-Kabir.
So his magnum opus on music, which he wrote around 930 CE, was an absolute game changer. Back then, in the Abbasid courts, music was often just seen as light entertainment, but Al-Farabi, he elevated it to a deeply serious philosophical treatise. He blended strict mathematical derivations with real-world empirical observations from actual performing musicians, and, connecting right back to his focus on language, he examined exactly how rhythm and melody can be used to supercharge the emotional impact of our speech and poetry.
This just brilliantly illustrates his broader project. By elevating music from simple court entertainment to a rigorous philosophical science, placing it right alongside mathematics, he perfectly integrated it into his overall map of knowledge. For him, music wasn't just a fun, sensual diversion. It was a powerful tool for ethical and intellectual elevation that reflected the universal order itself.
This brings us to Part 4, the physics of sound, where math meets human perception.
Rooted in Aristotelian physics, Al-Farabi elegantly explained the fundamental nature of what we actually hear. He understood that sound requires a material medium to exist, like air. It starts with rapid, successive vibrations coming from a struck object. These vibrations agitate the air, creating pressure waves that travel all the way into our ears. It's simple but profound. No air, no sound.
And this brings up a beautiful distinction that really highlights his analytical mind. He defined the literal, physical difference between random noise and a musical tone based entirely on how regular those vibrations are. Disordered, irregular motions, that gives us harsh noise. But controlled, periodic, regular vibrations, that creates a musical tone. A sound that, as he put it, evokes delight or tarab.
To really understand these harmonious vibrations, he actually used Pythagorean principles. He conducted monochord experiments, testing the strings of instruments like the lute, and he demonstrated that if you have a string's length, you create a perfect mathematical ratio, 2:1. We hear that as a perfect octave. Halve the string, double the pitch frequency. It is just pure acoustic harmony.
But here is where Al-Farabi really proves his genius as a practical scientist. He didn't just blindly follow the rigid math. He noticed that pure Pythagorean tuning, when you stack the notes up, actually creates some awkward intervals that sound pretty harsh. So he advocated for something called empirical tempering. He argued for physically tying movable frets onto string instruments, insisting that the human ear, not just a math equation on a page, must be the final judge of harmony. This was absolutely crucial for playing the complex microtones and quartertones used in Middle Eastern music.
Part 5. A holistic legacy, connecting the soul to the cosmos.
Through works like his famous treatise on the intellect, Al-Farabi connected physics, the human soul, and cosmic order into one brilliantly unified tapestry. He genuinely believed that the human intellect is the key concept bridging all these different fields together. Whether he was examining the tiny vibrations of a lute string or the massive orbits of the cosmos, he saw a deeply interconnected universe, and he believed we could understand that universe through reason, observation, and language.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought. Today we exist in these hyper-specialized silos, right? The physicist rarely talks to the poet, and the musician rarely studies the cosmos. But what have we lost by isolating our sciences from one another? I highly encourage you to think a bit more like the second master today. Look for those hidden connections. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring.